Gotta be kidding me. Dropped it off the table.
Okay. 7.
Chris, the topic we will be discussing today is: how do you make in-game travel interesting?
It's not possible.
We're about to find out.
Hello and welcome to Roll for Topic, a roundtable discussion about topics relating to running games. My name is Chris Salzman.
My name is Andy Rao.
And we are coming at you live from the quarantine.
Indeed we are.
So it is April 14th. At this point, Andy and I are both in Michigan, so we've been in shelter in place for a month or so.
That's like a subjective, 78 years, but yes, continue.
Yes, yeah. So this podcast will not be all about that, but we just wanted to get that out up front just so everybody understands why we are probably a little loopy and or antisocial or what have you as we're going through this. But yeah, so we do want to talk about the topic at hand, but before that we wanted to dive into a little bit about what, Andy, have you been doing gaming-wise and media-wise? What have you been planning? What have you been playing? Those sorts of things.
Yeah, well, I guess I should first mention, maybe you've had this experience too. Despite imagining when this whole social distancing thing started that I would have lots of time and energy for fun stuff, that I found that I feel more harried and stressed somehow, despite having less errands to run and things like that. So all that to say, the pandemic has not turned into the glorious gaming vacation that part of me sort of imagined it would. Mm-hmm. But I have gotten a little bit of game stuff in. If you listener were listening to our last episode, we talked about some of the online games we were hoping to run. The online games I talked about haven't panned out yet because we're kind of waiting on people to get their characters created and all that. So the only gaming I've done in the last couple of weeks is I've run a couple sessions of Dungeon Crawl Classics for my family. It's my wife and my preteen daughter and my elementary school aged son. So. And that has been pretty fun. Very fun.
Yeah.
So, and this was my son's first introduction to role-playing of any sort. I've run a couple of little sessions of things for him in the past, but this is the first time I really sat him down and said, here's your character, here's what you're going to do. And we played a multi-session adventure from start to finish. So that's what I've been
super
doing.
Great. Did he get into it?
So we played 2 sessions. We split the adventure in half. It was just a real simple dungeon crawl. The first session, it was pretty clear he didn't know what to really he was supposed to be doing, and he was kind of acting up a little bit because of it. And then by the second time, he was much more businesslike. I guess he understood what he was supposed to be doing. In the first game we played with him, I mean, he was doing a silly thing that young kids will do when they don't understand or when they're nervous about a situation. So the silliness factor was a little high. But by this time the second half rolled around, he was playing seriously. So I'm not going to push him to play more D&D unless he really wants to. But I don't know. I hope he enjoyed it enough. I have a feeling that we'll be seeing him at the game table again.
That's super great. Yeah, you shared that he gave himself a couple of magic items or just normal items.
Yeah. Yes.
Fish related things. I don't know if you want to talk.
Yes. I unfortunately told him to fill in some details on the character sheet himself. And so when I scrutinized the character sheet to make sure all was in order, I discovered that he had 2 weapons, a happy fish and an angry fish. And he had already noted one of the treasures he had found, which was a poop. So,
okay.
Yeah, we'll keep this, PG rated, but suffice it to say, every action he attempted to do in the game involved one of those fish or the poop. Yeah, so that was what we he got that out of his system in the first game, and then the second game was a little bit more serious. He was using real weapons and trying to do realistic things. So
that's great. I kind of feel like even adults should have that one session where you just do the weird stuff, and then
totally.
Then the second session you can kind of restart your character, maybe respec things out and get going from there.
I hadn't thought of that, but yes, it was like the blowing off steam, episode, the blowing off steam session. I wanted to mention something else because it might dovetail with some stuff I've seen you chatting about on the Roll for Topic Discord, which is I have started reading some of the Hawkmoon novels.
Oh, nice, yeah.
So yeah, I got kind of the bug to introduce my daughter to Michael Moorcock, but I just couldn't remember how age-appropriate some of the Elric stuff is. I think it mostly is, but I think it does drift into, like, slightly less age-appropriate stuff. So I remember Hawkmoon being a little bit more heroic. Like, he's a little bit more of a good guy than Elric.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we've just read a little bit of it. All of Michael Moorcock's novels are so full of, like, stuff you want to play, worlds you want to play a game in, and characters you want to encounter in a role-playing game. It's really fun to read. So.
Yeah. I think, so we were chatting about fantasy novel covers, like just the covers on fantasy novels recently. So I have a collection of Elric novels that I've been collecting over the years, a very particular kind of like set of covers. And they're just like these wonderful pieces of fantasy art to look at, just like super cheesy, like super over the top, but like at the same time, just like, yeah, that's cool. Like I want to be part of that world. Yeah,
it's really evocative. Imagine, I know which covers you mean. They're sort of like phantasmagoric almost, like have this sort of weird dreamlike vibe to them, and they look great. Imagine, like the 1980s mass market fantasy version of Elric, It would be so bland compared to the really dopey looking Elric on your book covers.
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, some of these covers really remind me of Final Fantasy like concept art.
Oh,
so there's the artist who did like the concept art for like Final Fantasy VI, for example, Amano. I think his name is. It's worth looking up sometime. They're just these really like dreamy, almost impressionistic like character concepts and stuff, right? Like, so the actual game itself, right, doesn't totally get to kind of the majesty, I guess you could say, of that art, but right, it's very evocative when you look at it. You just get the sense of who these characters are and things like that. And these Elric covers are very, very similar. But yeah, so speaking of Final Fantasy, I guess the kind of the big event in my life in gaming is the Final Fantasy VII remake came out.
Yeah.
So I've been playing that obsessively. And like I think there's a conversation that happens a lot in like video games and role-playing games, like tabletop role-playing games, about like them informing each other quite a bit. Right. So like people want to play D&D like it's a video game, or, play a video game that's D&D, things like that back and forth. But, so playing the remake is really interesting because there's all sorts of like little side quests and stuff that feel very like tabletop role-playing games. I think one of the very first things that I did in this remake is, go on a hunt to find all these little, like, these cats that a little girl had lost in the city. Right? It's something that's like, it's this, like, throwaway little quest, but it gets you kind of running around this massive city that there's, it's big enough that it's going to take you some time to explore and all that. But it's also, like, it's not a very video gamey thing, right? To just, run around and look at, find some cats.
Totally.
Or I guess it is now, right? Like, and that's the sort of thing that I think came from tabletop then back into video games.
I'm having a picture of our different childhoods, Chris.
Yes.
While you were coming of age playing a game where your first quest is to go find a bunch of cats that are lost. I was playing Baldur's Gate where your first quest is, all right, go into the basement and kill a lot of rats.
Yeah. No, to be clear, this cat scenario is only in the remake.
Okay. Yeah. All right, I take it.
I'll need to point you towards my blog where I'm cataloging all the differences between the original and the remake.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, let's dive into our topic at hand before I talk about Final Fantasy VII for the rest of our time. But so I just rolled on the table and audibly groaned when I landed on 7 for how do I make in-game travel interesting. So Andy, I'm sure we've talked about this in the podcast before, but I have yet to find a way to make travel interesting. And I don't know if I'm just a broken GM or something like that. But
well, that probably goes without saying. But yes,
yeah, right, yeah. Right. It's kind of the whole conceit of this show is making us better at this thing we.
The whole show is a cry for help. But yeah.
Yeah, essentially. But so I am just wondering if you have any stories about a time where like a time where in-game travel was interesting at your table, or any tips and tricks?
Probably not, but I do have a few thoughts. But can I change that question around a little bit and ask you?
Sure.
So describe to me how travel happens in the games you've played. And let's try and figure out why it's so boring.
Oh, that's a super good question. So I think the way that I've done travel, so there's a couple ways I've done it. So one is I just sort of wing it, and that ends up being a little bit more fun. But the way that I've done it that just seems boring to me is sort of how the D&D books want you to do it. Is you're traveling, and then every once in a while you're rolling on a table to decide that something has happened, right? Or, that nothing has happened. For whatever reason, the tension for that is just totally lost for me when I'm doing that, because it feels somewhat arbitrary, right? Like you're taking this journey that's maybe taking a week or something, and you're distilling it down to 7 or 10 dice rolls on a table. So I think narratively it becomes a little tricky to connect all those things together, and also it's just sort of well, I don't know, what's the point? Really, what have we done? What have we learned to really advance the story?
I think that is a pretty common experience of travel. And just to be clear, I'm not setting myself up as a travel D&D travel expert. But yeah, when I was a kid playing and running games for my friends, we did, because we didn't know that you didn't have to, we religiously used that travel system for the games we played. So every X miles we'd roll for random encounters. It was, this mix of often pretty uneventful. Occasionally it would have very stupid and nonsensical results, but sometimes it would result in these random encounters that were really memorable for whatever reason. In most of my games these days, I would say, I wing it like you do. I mean, I don't have a lot of insight here, except to say that in the last year or two, I have run some games where travel was more fun. And the game in particular, although I'm sure it's not the only game where travel was fun, is the One Ring role-playing game. And that feels very appropriate because so much of the Lord of the Rings is traveling. And, when you're a kid, you're just excited by the Balrog parts and the orc fights. But if you reread it as an adult, you realize how much of the heart of those stories is in the travel and in the experience of travel. And the role-playing game kind of makes a mini game out of travel, which is why it's somewhat interesting. I don't know if it was amazingly fun. I don't know if you would play just this travel mini game, if you didn't have to.
Yeah.
But I won't go into all the details on that travel system, partly because I don't remember all of the details because we've been quarantined for years. But I think what it came down to is that the One Ring introduces some elements of some choices that you have to make in traveling. And it has real consequences for kind of traveling poorly or for getting unlucky in your travel. So in that game, you chart your path, you look at the map, you choose the route you're going to take, it is often the case that there's a quick route that goes through dangerous territory where there's a high risk of nasty encounters, and there's a longer route that is a little bit safer. And you have to choose your pace, and you roll on a regular basis for possible encounters. And they spread the rolling across all the members of the party, and you have to assign the different members in your party kind of a travel role. So somebody's the scout, somebody is the hunter, and the responsible for finding food and stuff like that. So in the course of a typical journey, everybody kind of gets a chance to roll and have them contribute a little bit towards keeping the party healthy. And then when you get to your destination, depending on how well those rolls went and what encounters you had in the way, you could be starting your adventure exhausted and kind of low on resources, or you could be starting it fresh and, raring to go.
Interesting.
So I've glided over a lot of the details, but yeah, what makes it interesting is there's just enough decisions you have to make that feel like they are meaningful. And it starts with which one of us should be the hunter, so everyone's checking their skill sheet to see who has the best skill that's related to that. I feel like usually in D&D travel, you don't really ask those questions. You don't, how hard are you going to push yourselves? Which of these couple different options for a route are you going to take? You know, how much food are you going to bring with you? We just usually don't ask those questions for D&D, and so the DM just kind of wings it, maybe does one or two like perfunctory rolls for like an orc ambush, you know, but it's never much more interesting than that. So, all right, I've been babbling for a long time. So, choices. I think giving players choices during travel is important.
One thing that you said that I really liked is, you know, there's sort of like an easy path or a hard path that you're presenting to the players. I think, oftentimes when travel comes up in the games that I've run, it's very much like there's a point A to point B sort of thing. You just have to get there. Yeah. There's one road to go there. Go ahead and do it, right? You're powerful heroes at this point, so it's going to be fine. Yeah. Right? You'll encounter a couple things. Going back to something I said about like winging it here and there, the one thing that I've started doing, which is, you know, off book a bit, is just going through the table and picking a couple of interesting scenarios that jump out to me and just running those, right? And then kind of stringing them together in some fashion or otherwise. Yeah. Just sort of jumping over the, like, okay, now we're going to stop and see what's going to happen in the next 4 hours. Cause we have to, right? Cause it's a 3-day journey. Yeah. I'm wondering too, this is also going back to what you were saying about like the old school hex crawl. Sounds like most of the games that we're both running are very sort of narrative focused in that, right? Like it's kind of like the story is the most important thing. Yeah. I wonder if travel would just be inherently more interesting if it was a hex crawl. If it's sort of like, if the point of it was just dungeon delving, getting all the treasure, that sort of stuff, because then travel at that point is just like, that's just sort of another dungeon in between your checkpoints. Yeah, which makes me wonder, it's like, if relinquishing some of that like desire for combat, right, over having like a little bit more narrative and story, if you then kind of lose out on that being an interesting part of the game.
I think, and not to just continually dwell on the One Ring thing, but I think in any system when you're running travel and your players are on long journeys where they'll have many possible encounters, I think you should look seriously into how you can like really abstract those encounters. Mm-hmm. Because I don't really think you want to spend a whole evening, you know, like breaking out the combat map for like the third goblin, you know, the third like low tier scuffle with goblins or, you know, roaming forest creatures. One reason the One Ring's journey system works is because there is a mechanic that sort of tracks, I guess, for lack of a better word, like player exhaustion levels, your mental health and your exhaustion levels. And it's kind of hard to represent in D&D the real effect of like a difficult journey, which is exhaustion and just you're dispirited, you're tired, you're worn out. You know, you've been pushed to the limit and you are like kind of, until you get a chance to really recover, you are just not going to perform very well. And D&D, I know D&D has some mechanics for like being exhausted, and but really the only metric most D&D games use is like hit points. And it's so trivial for most parties of D&D characters to restore their lost hit points, or even to just get rid of negative conditions like exhaustion, that a long journey that exhausts you doesn't really have much bite in default D&D, because as soon as they get to the end of the journey, their cleric will just fix whatever, you know, conditions you've imposed on them, you know? So if you want to make travel a big deal, I think you need to find some kind of consequence for travel that doesn't go well, you know, that the players will be really motivated to try and avoid. And I don't know what that would be in D&D. I don't know. Does any of this spark any thoughts in your mind?
It does. And it kind of gets down to a little bit more of like a philosophical question to me. It's like, so like, what is the purpose of even playing the travel part of it? Yeah. Right. So like, you know, a lot of D&D ends up happening inside of like set piece maps of some sort, right? So you're in a city, you're in a dungeon, you're in a castle, those sorts of things. And it's, everything is sort of tuned around that too, right? If you are in a gigantic open field, right, a lot of your strategies and stuff can change quite a bit because you can just run away in another direction, right? There's no doors to stop you, anything like that. Right. So, I mean, like the philosophical question is then like, so like, why have travel at all? Like, why not just say like, okay, and now you're in this place, or okay, like, you know, you've teleported, or, you know, do something else like that. And I think it is that Lord of the Rings style. Like, you want them to feel the journey. Like, you want to have that journey and feel like you've really traveled.
Yeah, you don't want them to feel like they've just teleported like across the continent, right? Or maybe
right.
you don't.
Yeah. I mean, I think you don't. I mean, there's various ways that I've seen it done. Like, I think like the Adventure Zone had a really interesting way to handle this. So it's a actual play podcast that happened where they just had like a thing that kind of just shot them out of a cannon to different places, right?
Yep.
So it skipped over travel entirely in that way. To me, right, the games that I've run have been grounded a bit more in sort of that like that fantasy of D&D where it is like you do have to walk, right? Like, there's teleport spells, but it's not like it's readily available everywhere like that. So you have to walk or you have to ride horses or something like that. But it's making me wonder, it's like, so if travel as rolling D20s every once in a while is uninteresting, right? So you can approach it with maybe stringing together encounters that you have pre-planned to make it more interesting, have something that's like time-based, that they have to get from point A to point B quickly, or something's going to happen in the story if they don't get there quick enough, or there's kind of other sort of mechanisms you can put in place to where it's not just like we just took a short rest after every encounter and we're fine, like that. But it's also making me wonder. It's like if travel using those sort of mechanics is uninteresting, like why not switch to different mechanics, right? So like why not just impose the like One Ring style stuff or switch to a totally different game entirely for the travel, or make it a only role play focus.
Yeah, I was going to say, you don't need to have mechanics. I mean, if you have players that are buying into the premise, you can just say, hey, you're really exhausted, and play your character accordingly, and a good player will put in some effort into that.
Yeah, like I know I certainly would as a player. So
you mentioned tracking time, and I do think that travel is part of a bigger conversation about how you are sort of managing your campaign world. Because I think travel is really, the interestingness or lack thereof of travel is really connected to like whether you are tracking things like time, days and weeks and months in your campaign. If you're tracking the passage of the seasons, if you are doing all of that, travel can be an interesting thing that really plays into the experience of the setting, right? If they have to hurry to get somewhere before it snows, that's interesting. It's more doable if you have a system for like watching these things if you're tracking them in your campaign world already. Gary Gygax has like a famously overwrought section in the first edition Dungeon Master's Guide where he basically rants that like if you're not tracking time in your campaign, you're like not even playing Dungeons and Dragons, so you're playing a game for babies. But there is something to it. If you don't have an interest in the sort of larger scale tension that like the passage of time can create, then maybe travel isn't really something that's going to add a lot to your campaign. If you don't care about that stuff, if you don't enjoy that sort of detail, then sure, just narrate a little travel sequence and have them show up across the continent. It doesn't really matter. I was thinking about this because, again, in the Discord with some of our past guests, there was some chatter about the Tomb of Annihilation campaign for 5th edition D&D. It's a campaign, it's got a big hex map, and you're supposed to play by the rules and, laboriously make your way across the map, because the plot has a pretty tight time limit. And so those two things feed each other, right? That time limit has a real bite to it because it's going to take you so long to get to the places you want to go. And so that imposes difficult questions like, I think, maybe we should go over here, but if it turns out to be the wrong place, we've just blown a whole week of our precious timeline. So I think travel is probably best considered as part of a bigger conversation about how you're managing like time and the seasons and stuff like that in your campaign. That's the end of my rant. I went off on a Gygaxian monologue.
Yeah, that was fantastic.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
It does. Yeah, that does make me wonder, right? Like, because the campaigns that I'm running have been sort of out of books for the most part. And I think that travel would probably just be more interesting, right, if it was a bit more of a sandbox campaign. If sort of the story you were telling supported the like, oh, you got snowed in, so let's see what happens.
Yep.
With that, I probably railroad my players. It doesn't really bother me. I don't really see that as a terrible thing. Railroad them a little bit because, right, there's also like there's a book that we're going through, and that's sort of guiding some stuff. But if it was a bit more open, if it was just like we're going to kind of see what happens. There's a hex map. Yeah, we're tracking some time so we can have some stuff that happens at different points. I think it would be quite a bit more compelling to get into the nitty gritty of kind of day by day stuff. And this even gets down to things that I think a lot of GMs don't track. Like you had mentioned, like rations and getting food and stuff in the One Ring. I mean, that's just not on my radar in the games that I'm running. And I think part of that is just because we don't play all that often, right? It's not like we're getting together twice a week to play for 3 or 4 hours where we have the time and energy to track those sorts of things. This has given me just a lot of stuff to think about. I kind of am just leaning towards next time that travel comes up, just skipping it because it's just like, well, if it's not serving what it's, what the goal of the campaign is, why bother?
I mean, I would say it is better to just skip it than to run boring, uninteresting travel sessions that don't contribute anything to the game. I think it's worth asking, could this be an interesting part of the campaign? But if the answer is that you don't really know how to do that, then yeah, just narrate the travel. I mean,
I'm bagging on travel, but I've also had some really lovely game moments that have come out of it too, for whatever reason. But yeah, it's like when I think back about moments in games that I've really enjoyed, some of those have been in travel sequences. Some of them have been in like a very by the book dungeon, 5-room dungeon sort of stuff. It's just sort of like, I think the magic of the table is not necessarily in exactly how you're running each individual scenario and the game.
Yep.
The game, it's about how everybody's sort of reacting to it
too.
So it's like if running travel, I'll speak for myself. So if when I'm running travel, right, if what I'm finding is that it's not providing a high potential for kind of interesting engagement at the table, then get rid of it, right? Do something else. But, like every time that I find something that does work, like, try to do more of it.
One thing that travel can be useful for, even if you're not doing a hardcore, like tracking the days of the month type of situation, is it is kind of a natural point in like stories to get those like casual character interactions. So, the Lord of the Rings, think about all of the little character moments that happen in the course of traveling, right? Though they don't have character moments in the middle of the fight, with the orcs. They have the character moments like during the, endless journey through the old forest or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So, I wonder, even if you plan to skip over combat, over travel for the most part, you might want to just introduce a couple of really short, like role-playing opportunities. Like, and don't make it a big scene that lasts an hour, but just like you you see such and such a thing while you're traveling. What does this make your character think? Or throw a few little short scenes at your players to the extent that they want to. Let them role play just like a moment in their characters, a quick little interaction, and then get on with it. I haven't necessarily done that very effectively, but I have been in games. I have played in games where the GMs would pause and say, in the distance you see whatever, the tower, you see a tower, what does it remind you of from your childhood? And you get a quick little character moment. Maybe it's memorable, maybe it's not. Then you do that a couple times, and then you get your destination, and then you get to the, back to the killing of orcs.
Yeah, I was just going to ask have you done any sort of random encounters that you can remember that weren't combat that you like, that you'd recommend other people throw in to their campaigns?
Oh, honestly, not really. There's so many great encounters you can add in, but I'm probably not the best source of it. When I was when I was adhering most strictly to the like random encounter travel system, I was playing games where really the only thing you were likely to encounter was something that wanted to kill you. So I don't. But there's all sorts of opportunities for little non-combat encounters. It just depends on what your group will find fun. Yeah. How about you?
I'm trying to think. There's one little encounter that I ran that kind of came out of a random table. So they were fighting some hobgoblins or something like that, but I came up with a moderately interesting location for them to have that. So they were traveling through a field, but instead, I had like an interesting rock formation that the hobgoblins were using to shoot arrows at them from quite a distance. So the party had to figure out like how to get over there, right, and then how to deal with the hobgoblins. But then after that, the rock structure was such that there was kind of all these little natural caves and stuff in there.
Oh, nice.
Right, so they could either just move on or they could, explore around. And so I put, a piece of, a treasure chest in there if they looked around enough in the area. But that ended up being a really fun encounter, so they didn't get a ton of experience. They didn't really find anything all that great, but it's something that's really stuck out to me. It's like they could have just gone from point A to point B, but there was something interesting in the way. They had, a bit of a combat scenario, but then I gave them a fun thing to explore, and then there was also something that they could find.
Yeah.
And so they felt like the exploration was rewarding to them. Like, felt like it was rewarding. It was rewarding to them. It was rewarding at the table. I don't know why it's not like a psychological experiment.
Right.
It was fun to find something in the rock formation.
Yeah, and it's probably a whole nother topic, but exploration is such a compelling idea and really challenging to realize in a role-playing game the way that it is realized in other mediums, right? Mm-hmm. There's playing a big open world video game or something like that can capture that thrill of exploration and those moments where you come over the mountain just as the sun is setting and it looks really cool. Those are hard. There's a certain type of thing that is just frankly hard to convey in like a tabletop gaming experience, and you shouldn't kill yourself trying to recreate, situations that, D&D just isn't really all that well equipped to recreate. But I don't even know why I'm babbling.
No, I think what you're doing is you're lamenting that not all of your sessions are like Tolkien novels.
I think that's pretty much what it is.
Yeah.
Isn't it funny though? I feel like there is a lesson in Tolkien's travel. When you're a kid and you read those books, I love Tolkien. I loved him as a kid, but man, those big travel sections were boring, right? They were just tedious, and you wanted to get to the cool stuff. And it's just interesting to me. I wonder if there's a lesson for role playing as well. Like, as I've gotten older and potentially more mature, I see the value that those scenes have in the story. Like, not only do they show us new things about characters, but they provide like an important pacing element to the story that certainly has some relevance to a good D&D game, right? I suspect that there are some people listening to this for whom like it would be really rewarding to invest in the travel portions of their games. And I also think that, a lot of, for a lot of GMs, it's going to work better just to like, briefly summarize those travel things.
Oh, well, I think we should wrap it there. I think we've probably said all that we can say about travel. That's right. But this is an interesting topic, I think, because it is a little bit divisive in that some people hate it, some people love it, and I'm sure lots of people have good tips and tricks. So, do reach out, send them in if you have them. I think, let's see.
You know what?
Maybe to wrap... Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry. It just occurred to me, we spent all this time talking about travel in like a D&D fantasy type environment, but, there's also... travel in like science fiction games is a big deal, right? Travel is a big topic, and we've really only scratched the surface. Although I've said everything that I have to say about it.
Yeah. You heard it here first. Andy has said that you need to add spaceships to your D&D.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I think, let's see. We can probably skip adding a topic on the table. I think Andy and I have talked a little bit about this. We might actually be resetting the table at some point, so... There's your teaser for something that's upcoming. But otherwise, I guess, any sort of parting shots. I guess, what are you said you have a couple games in progress. Do you think anything's going to happen this week?
I think this weekend I'll be running some stuff for my family again. I don't think that the online games are going to be ready by this weekend. It would be great if they were. I'm ready to run them. It's just a situation where everybody is way more busy than you would ever imagine being stuck at home, So
Nope,
I totally get it. How I don't know if this happened, but will happen. But my wife has expressed some interest in running some Call of Cthulhu for me and my daughter. My daughter has a budding interest in the horror genre, and so a good Call of Cthulhu will be good for her. So
yeah.
How about you?
Fantastic.
What do you have kind of on the radar?
So tomorrow I have D&D.
All right.
And we'll see how that goes.
And this is
as you mentioned.
Have you been running this campaign online for a while already, or
this will be the second session that I've run online. So this is a group that's been meeting for 2 years or so. We used to be a weekly game, and then we shifted over to we were trying to wrap the campaign up, and then it just wasn't going to happen that session. And now we are on session like 3 or 4 of wrapping it up. So
that is amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah. So we'll see. I mean, part of it's just like it's just taking me longer to kind of get to where we need to go than I thought. But so we'll see what happens with that. We might be back next time on this podcast and be talking about like, well, they're still going, or we might have a wrap up session. But yeah, and then I'm still playing in this game called Lexicon, although I'm a little behind on what I'm supposed to be doing. So a friend of ours, Phil, is running this. It's sort of like a shared like writing exercise game. So there's a wiki for it, and we're all writing articles in fiction. So you write an article and you reference 2 articles that don't exist, and then other people will write those articles eventually. So you're kind of building up this wiki about this shared world. Yeah, it's pretty cool. I need to go back and read some stuff and write some stuff too. But yeah, so it's kind of fun. Yeah, it's the thing that is really coming out of all this shelter in place stuff for me is thinking about like what sort of games would work well in this in this environment, right? Like, not that, hopefully it's done pretty soon, right? But I'm going to be transitioning. I'm going to have a new baby pretty soon. So that's going to change sort of my gaming life again too. Yep. So I'm trying to not be like, well, I have to, like, the only way to play games is to play D&D in person, once a week on Fridays. Like, just broaden my horizons a little bit because it's going to be different. But.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I think that's about it. But thank you all so much for listening. If you enjoyed this, please share it with any of your other nerds who are stuck at home. Yeah, I think there was. Let's see. Did we mention the few episodes earlier?
Yeah, we did not. But okay. Before the episode, Chris and I were talking a little bit if there are any episodes from our back catalog that would be relevant to you if you are kind of trying to figure out running games in a socially distant environment. So there are a couple that I flagged, Chris. Our usual rule for this podcast is not to do any homework or preparation, as should be pretty obvious if you've listened to an episode. But we do... I noted, if you go way back to the beginning, we had an episode 6. We talked about the topic of running role-playing games for different sized groups. So if you are finding yourself stuck at home, maybe with a smaller than usual group of players, or you're just running for a really different size group online or something like that, you might want to check out episode 6. Then Chris, you mentioned episode 10, how to deal with bored or distracted players, which is always, it's relevant in any context, but we're all bored and distracted, more than usual at the moment. So and then I guess the if you are really tuning in for the first time, the most recent episode before this one was all about running online games. So you might want to check those out. All right, so there we did a little bit of marketing of our own episodes there, Chris. How do you feel about that?
Super impressive.
All right.
I feel like that's probably something that better podcasters would do more often.
Probably, and they probably wouldn't tuck it way at like the end of the episode either. But this is how we roll.
Yes. All right. Well, thank you all so much again for listening. I've been Chris Salzman.
I have been Andy Rao.
And remember, if your players are having fun, even if they're on Zoom, you're a good GM.